I'm welcoming you and our panelists, Dr. Henry Wang and Ambassador Ischinger, to today's virtual discussion on China, Germany, Europe in an uncertain time, a conversation on the intersection of diplomacy and business. During the next hour, we want to put a focus on the future relationship between China and Germany. Against the background of the 50th anniversary of diplomatic relationship between China and Germany this year in 2022, and Russian President Putin's war against Ukraine with tremendous global economic consequences, one question is whether and how economic ties between the EU and Germany and China will be deepened and under which circumstances. Today's event is co-hosted by the Beijing-based think tank Center for China and Globalization and Agora Strategy Group, a geopolitical business consultancy based in Munich. Most of all, I'm now welcoming our distinguished panelists and speakers, Ambassador Wolfgang Ischinger, founder and honorary chairman of Agora Strategy Group, and Ambassador Ischinger, you've been chairman of the Munich Security Conference for 14 years, until the last Munich Security Conference in February this year. Ambassador Ischinger also served as German ambassador to the United States as well as to the United Kingdom, and was deputy foreign minister in Berlin. And before his appointment to Munich Security Conference, he was also global head of government relations at Allianz SE for 6 years, and is now also serving as a supervisory board member in different companies. And the Economist once described you as Germany's best connected former diplomat. Welcome, Ambassador Ischinger. And I'm also welcoming Dr. Henry Wang, founder and president of the Center for China and Globalization, CCG. Furthermore, you're holding different engagements in international institutions. And to give our guests only some examples, you are a steering committee member of the Paris Peace Forum and a member of the Migration Advisory Board of International Organization of Migration of the United Nations. Welcome, Dr. Wang. And for the format, after the introduction, Dr. Wang will lead the discussion with Ambassador Ischinger as a dialogue between you two. And afterwards, all our participants will have the chance to raise your questions towards Dr. Wang and or to Ambassador Ischinger. You can either type in your question already during the event in the chat function or choose the hand-raising function. And starting with the Q&A in about half an hour, you will have the opportunity to switch on your camera and discuss directly with our panelists. And I would also encourage to do so, and for the advantage of a lively and open debate. And I'm now passing over directly to you, Dr. Wang. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jennifer. And it's such a great honor to see Ambassador Ischinger. I know that you just come back from Munich meeting in Washington, and also now come to our this joint event with Agora Strategic Group. So it's really a great occasion to welcome, to host these important exchanges. We had the honor of welcome Ambassador Ischinger last year, and also before last year as well. So quite a few occasions, and it was really a great honor to see you again. And as we all know that you've been leading the Munich Security Conference for 14 years, and has made the Munich Security Conference really very important global player and a global platform, and actually has promoted the peace and the security, for the last 14 years. I remember last time when we had Munich Security Conference offline, and you were trying to break peace between Armenia and Azerbaijan. I mean, we were saying we should give you a Nobel Peace Prize maybe sometime for all the great contributions you made. I mean, this is really great. I mean, it become an Oscar of all the security conference, but it's important to not just security, but also all the important global issues, climate change and the pandemic and sustainable development. This is really great. So today, I think we are having people attending this event and really concerned about what has been going on for this global development. I know that you just come back from your trip in the U.S. and you have also met Dr. Kissinger, and I saw your tweet on that. And of course, Kissinger is already 99 years old almost, and that's remarkable. And he has been, half a century ago, he has actually, pioneered China-U.S. Diplomatic relations. But what I was thinking that, given now the China and EU and Germany have such a strong economic ties that actually since the new Chancellor Scholz come into office, President Xi has already spoke a virtual conference for three times already with your Chancellor. So it shows the importance of these bilateral relations. And of course, I'd like to say that basically since 2016, China and Germany become the largest trading partner for Germany, and also Germany is largest trading partner from EU towards with China. So it's really the intertwine. And in 2020, the German-China trade volume has reached over 200 billions, 210 billion. And then actually last year it's reached 250 billion and increased about 50%. That's incredible. And Germany also has invested the most in China among the EU countries. Over 5,000 German enterprises are operating in China, with almost 10,000 projects invested, almost reached $19 billion US dollars. So it's tremendous relations there, and so probably I would start with Ambassador Ischinger. What do you think about this economic relations between China and the EU, and China and Germany, and now with all those new development with the geopolitical tension, with the Ukraine-Russian war, and so how we can really steer through this complex situation and continue, the cooperation as much as we can. I mean, you are the global opinion leader on that, and I'd really like to seek your advice on that. Ambassador Ischinger, please.
All right, thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be in this program organized by the Agora Strategy Group with you. We've been partnering for quite a while. You've been a regular participant in Munich and in other events which we've been organizing around the world. And let me start by saying that the Munich Security Conference during my tenure, during these past 14 years, has the Munich Security Conference takes pride in having secured a trustful relationship with the Chinese leadership. I think it is very important that we got, 20 years ago, senior Russian participants in Munich. But I think it was even more important, more recently, to have a regular participation by senior Chinese leaders, for obvious reasons, and I'll get back to that in just a second. We are currently living in, I think there's this Chinese saying, we're living in interesting times, which is always meant as an understatement. But before I comment on that, let me just briefly also talk about the Munich Security Conference. It's true, as Jennifer said in the beginning, and as you have just remarked, that I've been running the conference, being responsible for its management for the last 14 years. I just want to make sure that everybody who participates in this program understands that I am now not deserting, I am not escaping. Actually, I'm staying on board. the transition which is currently underway means that I'm going from what has been a central management position. In a business enterprise, you would say I'm going from the management level to the supervisory board. And I will stay on with the organization as chair of the foundation board. The Munich Security Conference belongs to a foundation. So I will continue to be personally involved, and in particular with regard to our major partnerships and outreach programs. I was delighted when some years ago, the Chinese foreign minister personally took me aside at one of his first appearances in Munich. He took me aside and he said, and I quote from memory, he said, "Ischinger, for China, the Munich Security Conference is important. And this is why I want to assure you that we will always show up with senior spokespersons at your events. China takes this very seriously." I was delighted then, and I continue to be delighted, because when Foreign Minister Wang made this remark, our relationship was untroubled. We seemed at the time to have a perfectly harmonious perspective going forward. Well, at this moment, of course, we live really in interesting times. We don't know when and how a war which is currently ongoing in our neighborhood here in Europe, I'm speaking of Ukraine, how that will end. And we don't know, and we're worried about how this aggression that has occurred, how it will affect the totality of our relationships. And that brings me concretely to the points you raised. You see, one of the immediate lessons which we Germans had to draw from what has been happening in and with Ukraine recently is that we need to confess to ourselves that apparently we were too naive regarding, for example, our energy dependence on Russia. The German mainstream for the last 50 years thought that it was a good idea, in fact, to buy oil and gas from Russia because it was available, it was cheaper, and it appeared to be totally reliable. And that's why we supported, as a government, the building of pipelines, etc., etc. And we thought that because this had worked quite well, even during the difficulties of the Cold War, we thought that this relationship, this energy relationship, was more or less untouchable, and it would not be affected by the turmoils of international conflicts, etc. Well, we now had to learn that it is actually not a good idea to have 30 or 40 or 50% of your energy requirements coming only from one source. We are relearning the lesson, which is a very simple lesson, which all of us have learned. We're relearning the lesson that it's important to diversify your suppliers if you can. And that is, of course, now a very urgent mission regarding our relationship with Russia, because we're being accused by our own public, but certainly by others, that by buying all the Russian gas, we're actually financing Russian aggression against Ukraine. That's a bitter complaint, and we need to get rid of that. Now, why is this important in the relationship with China? It is important because the German business community has, over the last several decades, made itself far more dependent on China than it has ever been on Russia. Major German automobile manufacturers, for example, sell more automobiles today or build more automobiles today in China than anywhere else in the world. 30%, up to 40% or so of their overall activities have to do with China. So there is obviously now a reflection underway, which means that people are trying to figure out what, if anything, might be the lessons that our companies ought to learn from the debacle, from the catastrophe, from the difficulty that the war in Ukraine has created for our relationship with Russia. Do we not need to diversify also with respect to our relationship with China? Is it healthy, or is it going to be a future problem if at least important elements of our business community are so dependent on their relationship with China? In other words, we are not yet in a German or European Chinese crisis, but there is a growing degree of reflection and a growing degree of skepticism whether such extensive dependencies are good. One of the catchwords that everybody who listens to this, to our conversation, is familiar with is deglobalization. Bringing production back home, etc. Personally, I don't think that that works for a country like Germany that is so totally export dependent. But I do understand that political leaders and business leaders are now trying to think hard about ways to reduce their exposure on outside actors, including this important relationship with China. That's the first point I want to make. I want to make a brief second point, which has to do directly, Henry, with Ukraine. When the Chinese foreign minister spoke virtually in February at the Munich Security Conference, I was able to ask him a straightforward question. What about China's support for the territorial integrity, for the sovereignty of Ukraine? And the foreign minister answered affirmatively. He said, yes, of course, China supports territorial integrity of Ukraine, just like as China supports the territorial integrity of all other countries. That's a principle of the UN Charter. The question I'd like to raise is, why has China, I think I know the answer, but I'm asking you, and I'd like to raise this for our discussion. Why has China not decided to climb down from the fence on which it has been sitting in this Ukraine conflict? I understand that China has not taken decisions to provide military supplies, arms to Russia, but China has not used its tremendous power, as far as I can see, to exert a little bit of pressure to influence Russian thinking in terms of ending this war early. My thinking is, and Henry, please tell me if I'm entirely wrong. My thinking is that I cannot imagine that for the Chinese leadership, beginning with President Xi Jinping, the Prime Minister, whom I've had the privilege of meeting a couple of times, I cannot imagine that they feel comfortable about this ongoing war, because all the repercussions that this war is creating and will continue to create are, at least in my understanding, they carry negative consequences for the international order, which is something which China needs to uphold. China has a global outreach, has business connections, economic connections, energy connections around the world. You need order just as much as we do. You are interested in maintaining a functioning United Nations system. You are interested, I hope, just as much as we are, in an international system that is rules-based, and that is reliable, and that will provide peace, not conflict, etc. So when I look at the Chinese interests, including Chinese interests in the South China Sea and with respect to Taiwan, etc., I would think that this war conducted by Russia against Ukraine, in Ukraine, can actually not at all be in the Chinese interest. It is strengthening the US global role. It is strengthening NATO. China doesn't like NATO. Many statements have been made by the Chinese leadership about NATO. So my question is, why is China not taking a decision to demonstrate to us in Europe that China is actually on our side, and that China wants peace, and that China will talk to the Russians about the wisdom of ending this war rather sooner than later, in order to go back to business and to go back to a more harmonious relationship. So explain to me why China is not using this opportunity more. I think the Chinese reputation, the perception that China would create of itself among European elites would change quite dramatically if China came across as a power of, conflict resolution rather than sitting on the fence. Sorry for speaking so long, but that's the kind of question that I've been pondering in my own mind, and I've actually been discussing it also with some of my American interlocutors last week when I was, as you said, in the United States.